Kevin, everyone. Welcome back to The Way of Mastery. And today I am joined with an incredible man, someone that has had a very transformative journey, a journey that has taken him into the many inner realms within himself. And he is back sharing his wisdom, sharing his expertise, his knowledge with us today. And Jeremy is an investor, wealth mentor, spiritual teacher, someone that bridges consciousness, personal transformation, and financial prosperity. And we're going to get into the depth of his story today and where he's gone from graduating college with $50,000 in debt, no job, no car, business experience, or mentors, to achieving a life of financial freedom at a very young age of 30. And so over these years, Jeremy's mentored many people, from entrepreneurs to leaders in both the business and personal transformation realm. And really, I feel this is a great way to kick off his emergence back into the space. He has an incredible Substack that I've linked below this that you definitely got to check out, called Higher Yield. And really, this is what we're going to be exploring today, which is the inner path to wealth and prosperity. And this is a path that isn't often talked about enough, in my opinion, working in the realm of self-mastery, that we really, true wealth, true prosperity, true abundance is always an inside job. Yet this world teaches us to seek outside of ourselves. So with that being said, welcome in, brother. It's great to have you here. It's great to be joined with you.
Appreciate you, man. That was a humbling intro. Excited to be here. Hello, everyone.
Awesome, man. Well, I feel like the best place to start, just because it is what people like to hear the most, is a little bit of your hero's journey. Now, I've highlighted some of that in the intro here, but maybe take us a little bit through your experience, your path that you've had to walk, and all of us having our own unique path and the things that come up along this journey. So maybe just take us through that a little bit, and then we'll dive into the core of what we're going to be discussing today.
Cool. Should I go with the slightly condensed version or the expanded version?
Whatever your heart feels called to.
Okay. All right. We'll go with the slightly expanded version. So I grew up raised in the church, pretty strict Christian upbringing. And that allowed me to have some unique experiences with God and Jesus from a very young age. I remember being about 6, maybe 7 years old in church and having this kind of full body experience that during when they were singing the worship music. And I didn't exactly, at the time wasn't able to make meaning of what was happening, or, I didn't have the vocabulary for it, but I would have these moments where I would experience God's presence, and then I would kind of, you go back to everyday life, and I would experience whether it was my parents or people in the church or whatever it may be, living a very different life than what was kind of talked about in the teachings. And so I paint that to start because from a young age, I kind of was on this quest, if you will, even before I was aware of it, trying to hash out truth from fiction, coherence from distortion. And I wrestled with that all throughout my upbringing. We can fast forward now to me being in high school and my parents deciding to get divorced. And for anyone who's raised Christian, it's like, that's forbidden. You're supposed to never divorce and till death do us part and all that, right? So it was kind of the cherry on top of like the hypocrisy that I experienced, where I was told my whole life, you don't lie, you don't cheat, you don't have sex till marriage, you remain faithful your entire life when you make commitments. And then I kind of saw the reality of it behind closed doors in my household. And And to be clear, this isn't a hit piece on my parents. This is more speaking to humanity in general, right? But these experiences shaped me, and so around that age, I started to entered my rebellious season where I began to experiment with all sorts of illicit substances, drinking, smoking, entheogens, whatever it may be. Not in a conscious way, obviously. Just trying to kind of experience life outside of the bubble that I was raised in. And so that kind of was my high school later high school experience, and then transitioning into college. We can fast forward now to when I'm 20. I had been, drinking, partying, etc. But all the while, if you remember, I started at age 6 or 7 having these kind of experiences and always desiring this deeper connection and deeper understanding of with the metaphysical and with the creator and all that. But also at the same time feeling like an inner resistance because the God that I was taught about was not the God that I had experienced in these visceral kind of internal experiences that I had had throughout my life. So there was that kind of resistance and a continual seeking. And that seeking aimed itself towards, the external for my teenage years, where I was just going hard and I was just trying to experience the boundaries of consciousness, I guess, the limits that I could take things to. So I had been drinking, partying, etc. I'm 20 years old, and long story short, I get myself arrested, drunk in public. I think I had possession of cocaine or some shit. I was not living the lifestyle that that I live now, to say the least. So I wake up in jail. I have no idea why I'm there. I just wake up on a cold, hard floor, and I thought it was kind of a dream, but it wasn't. And I have to call my mom to bail me out. And that was just kind of like a mini rock bottom for me. Like hearing her voice when I'm calling her from like the Santa Rosa Department Center. And I got put on, like rehabilitation programs. I had to go to like AA. I had to do community service. I had to do all these different things. And long story short, that experience could have went 2 different ways, right? I could have been, taken like a fuck the system, not taking any personal responsibility for that. Or I could look inward and be like, how are my life experiences landing me here? So that's 20 years old. That's my first mini awakening. Shortly after that, I have a friend who comes to me and he basically he's trying to pitch me on a multi-level marketing company. And everyone knows what's the word I'm looking for? The reputation of multi-level marketing companies, right? It's a scam. It's a pyramid scheme. So I'm just like, stop. Like, no, I'm not interested. But he's persistent. And long story short, if it had been any other time in my life, I would have never given it the time of day, right? But I had just been arrested. I live in a frat house and I can't be around alcohol anymore. I can't be partying. I'm being randomly drug and alcohol tested for like 6 to 9 months. And so I need to find some things to kind of like replace my lifestyle with, right? So I agreed to join. And long story short, that little experience, even though it, obviously didn't culminate in the path that I would take in life, changed the trajectory of my life. That introduced me to personal development at a young age. It introduced me to Tony Robbins and Robert Kiyosaki and Zig Ziglar and all the goats for anyone who's into, personal development. It introduced me to the law of attraction. It introduced me to the ideas of consciousness and how energetics affect wealth and more than any of that as well. I'm around young people, 20, 21, 22 years old, making an amount of money that I had only seen in movies or like from athletes or, actors or whatever it may be. So that changed my paradigm around wealth, around success. I'm 20 years old, going to college, trying to get a business degree, knowing damn well I'm never going to sit in a cubicle. So that was a big kind of pivot in my life. Fast forward a little bit, I graduate college with a business degree, and I already knew I wasn't, I'm not going to work a job. I had never worked a job. I had no interest in working a job. So I moved back home with my mom. That's my eat shit phase, I like to call it. So I have all this student loan debt. I moved back in, and I'm just, I guess, that crazy kid who's like, all my friends are trying to get jobs at, KPMG or consulting or whatever, internships. And I'm just like, nah, I'm not doing any of that. And I just was aggressively trying to, at the time, Instagram was like very new. I had read a Gary Vaynerchuk book called Jab, 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 Right Hook. And he talked about how social media was going to be the future and how it was going to revolutionize business and the way that marketing and advertising is done. And I just went all in on that. That was probably 2011, 2012. And so that starts me on the quest with my first business, which was in the fitness space, transformational coaching and such. And each of those experiences was very formative. If I hadn't been in the MLM, I probably wouldn't have had the balls to pursue my own business, right? Because that's kind of like a hybrid. It's like they tell you you're running your own business, but you're kind of running theirs. But it's a good intro, right? It got me into personal development, habits, mindset. And, 14 years later, however long 14 years later, those things have stuck with me. Those are foundational understandings of how I view a growth mindset and a growth-based lifestyle. That journey then a few years later led to my first actual spiritual awakening. I was 23. I had decided to randomly buy this book. I don't even know why I bought it. I think the cover looked cool to me or something, called The Power of Now. And the rest is kind of history. I'm sitting on my mom's back porch, and I'm reading these pages, and all of a sudden everything just stops. Like for the first time in my life, I had experienced life outside of my mind, my ego. And the birds chirping all of a sudden is like volume 100. And I'm just completely present in a way that I didn't know. I didn't know that I wasn't before. It's kind of like one of those things, you don't know what you don't know. And that little experience proceeded to, it sent me on this quest where I had been familiar with energy and the law of attraction and your beliefs, but this was a different level because I hadn't had like the real experience, minus these little blips in church or whatever. But I got really into Joe Dispenza at that time, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, and I started, meditating 2 to 3 times a day. Started, juicing, just started doing all these different things, experimenting in a lot of different ways. And that just altered the trajectory of everything for me. I ended up shutting down my fitness business. I had like a full roster. It was like my dream. I have journals, like packed journals of like, I will be a successful full-time international fitness coach. Like I thought that was like the highest I was aspiring for. And I had already done that by like 23. And I just was like, this sucks. I just sit on Excel all day, answer emails and respond to clients and work out. It was not the life that I wanted. I wanted to help people deeper. I wanted to serve deeper. I was starting to understand a little bit more who I was and why I was here. And I felt like this is almost like disrespectful to God, or like a waste of my gifts to just be helping people with fat loss, muscle gain, strength gain. No shade to anyone doing that. It's just like, it's more about knowing yourself. So I was feeling the call for deeper, right? So I shut that all down. Full client roster. Probably doesn't make sense at all to do that, right? People are like, what are you doing? My clients are trying to pay me, and I'm like, nope, we're done. And so I spent 9 months, and I just started meditating like 2 to 3 times a day. I was doing like some stuff on my own. I was doing some Eastern transcendental stuff, and I was doing different Joe Dispenza stuff. And I was a big visualization, affirmations, journaling guy. Like I have many, many journals, and my students know this. I've done whole teachings where I've showed my journals throughout the years and how I literally manifested the life that I now have. And I was just going hard. I'm living with my mom. I'm in this little room. $50,000 in debt. My life doesn't reflect what my internal experience is at this time, right? And so it's a daily process of conditioning myself to believe in and expect and feel worthy of a reality that is so unfathomably different from the little chair I'm sitting in meditating with a blanket over me because my mom tries to talk to me while I'm meditating because she doesn't even understand what I'm doing. And so I go through that process and I pop out the other side and I realize this is what I want to do. This is what I want to help people with. And I had such profound experiences in my own journey, even though it was just this little mini journey thus far, that I wanted to help people. I wanted to introduce people to the basics of meditation and some basic inner work like shadow work and inner child work. So those were the areas that I started, and it had a huge impact on me and being able to forgive and heal from the way I was raised and not carry around the past like a dead weight and all that. So I created that led to my second offering, which was my first kind of like high ticket offering, my first like legit business offering where I had like I hired mentors and I actually did it right. Whereas the first one was just like, I was just figuring shit out. And so I don't want to make this too long, but that kind of set me on my journey right there. I had realized that going forward, it didn't make sense for me to have a separation between who I am and what I'm doing in business. And I think that's a common thing we see in society, like after people get off on Friday, then they're like, oh, I'm going to let my freak flag fly. I'm going to be who I actually am for 2 days. And then, oh, it's the Sunday scaries. And now it's back to these masks and stuff. I didn't want to live like that. I wanted to integrate who I am and what is, alive in me, what excites me. And I wanted to have there be no separation between that and how I make a living. And so that meant I needed to be probably more patient than others. You can't just expect people to be okay with that right away. It took building a serious foundation, credibility, trust, following, etc. But that was a big shift for me, and I never looked back. I ended up building a few other businesses, and then we can fast forward now to 2020. Up until then, I had only been doing one-on-one mentoring and coaching, so that had probably been about depending if we count fitness or not, between 7 and 10 years of like the one-on-one stuff. And then in 2020, that's when I launched the Level Up Collective. And this is kind of a cool story as well. I had been, I don't know if you've ever gotten into like hypnosis and stuff, but I have just been always interested in exploring consciousness in different ways. And so I've tried so many different modalities. And I had found this kind of world-renowned hypnotist who worked with like Rob Dietrich, like the Fantasy Factory, Robin Big. Worked with him. He worked with Common. He worked with Larry King. He worked with Tony Robbins, all these guys, right? So I was like, oh, definitely want to do this. I had been having sessions with him, and he had been giving me these this kind of homework that was like putting myself in a trance, and I was having these insane meditations where I was dropping in like super deep. And I'm having this meditation, and all of a sudden, just the words like level up collective come in, and I don't have any notion of what that is at the time. I already have like my own business product suite, and I wasn't anticipating building a group or anything. Long story short, I just kind of get shown that I'm supposed to like launch this group, and this is like end of January, beginning of February. I put out a story on my Instagram. I just kind of get out of the way. I'm like, if I created this group, I don't really know what it is even. Would you guys be interested? And like I said, it obviously helps that I had been coaching for 7 to 10 years. I had built a lot of, goodwill and trust amongst quite a few clients. And so when I extended that, I think I had like between 35 and 50 people who were like, yeah, we would join right away. No questions asked or whatever. So from idea to putting it out, that was probably 2 to 3 weeks. I put it out like mid to late February. Once I did that, if you remember during the COVID era, it was probably 2 weeks later that the world shut down because there was some bat virus and nothing was the same, right? Turns out that our community was kind of, our sense of community as humans was kind of taken away for however long that was, 18 months or so. People were locked in their houses. People were looking for, digital communities. A lot of people weren't earning income. People were looking for different ways to earn income. And so this is just, you want to talk about like God leading you and stuff. It's just example after example throughout my journey where I'm either like going in circles or I'm veering off the path, and then God just reroutes me. And this was a pretty big reroute because I had always had resistance to a group program. It's like, no, I prefer one-on-ones. But in reality, I just had resistances to serving large groups of people and, like coming more into who I am as a leader. Apparently broke through those. And once I launched the Level Up Collective, it pretty quickly became, took on a life of its own. When I launched it, it wasn't even initially about finances. That's another funny thing. I never really wanted to teach people about finance. And I'll try to wrap this up. I know this has been long. I never really wanted to teach people about finance. My background, if anything, I've done many different things, but what I was most passionate about was like human transformation, like interpersonal transformation. People used to call me like a life coach, but I don't like that. But that's kind of what I was most passionate about. Like, how do you take someone who has this unique background, this unique personality, this unique set of experiences and unique ways they see the world, and how do you help them completely change that? But what ended up happening is I created the Level Up Collective, and over time, I'm doing a lot of market research. I'm talking to our students, and over, they're just sharing like what they're most struggling with and wanting to learn more about is like in the financial area. And behind the scenes, I had been like investing. I knew quite a bit about credit and debt. I've obviously built at that time like 4 prior businesses. I knew quite a bit about finance. I have a business degree. I've read a ton of different books on business, investing, etc. And so that just kind of, I guess, kicked me into the arena. But just to be clear, like I never wanted to be some wealth guru or whatever. I was more I'm a pretty private person. I know I talk for a living now, but like it's not exactly how I intended for my life to be. I just have answered the call when God asked me to do certain things. And so it kind of naturally evolved, and it ended up being by far the most successful offering for me. And I suppose this coincides with my my personal journey as well, because I know I'm talking a lot about business, but basically all throughout each of those seasons of my life, my business reality was really just a mirror for where I was at in my own personal journey. Usually what would happen is I will go through things, I will have experiences where I need to kind of step back, integrate, heal, etc. And then I'm a teacher, so I like to teach, I like to share what I've learned. I like to help others with what I've gone through, etc., etc. So in that way, the LUC has been, which is this last community that I ran from 2020 to 2026. We're actually still winding it down, even though it's been closed to the public. And that's kind of what ushered me into teaching wealth and finance. I suppose I'll wrap it there. We can kind of talk about some other aspects of the wealth stuff later, but hopefully that gives people like a little bit of a broad overview. there's a lot of things that I could potentially go into, but I don't want to take up too much time.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and I appreciate you really setting the space and setting the tone for really the core again of what we're going to dive into here in just a bit. But your story, I'm sure, will resonate with some people listening, and others have walked another path, right? And even for me specifically, have been an entrepreneur and a business owner, but starting off in the corporate world and walking that route, whereas you turn the other way and you say, I'm going to start my own thing early on. And so, we all have our lessons that we go through, and the things that we have to learn along our own soul's journey. But what I find to be very interesting here is, again, everybody has their own path, they have their own journey, and it is absolutely perfect for who you are and what it is that you came here to integrate through your life and through perhaps some hardships, right? Which is those challenges, those difficulties, those adversity moments that you went through, that we all go through, that bring us into the depth of who we are and why we're here. And of course, that's always unfolding along the path. And your path that you've walked is very much different to mine. But this is the beautiful thing about having these types of conversations, is that even just through your story, I can very much relate to these pieces, and specifically the personal transformation that you've gone through. And being that business in itself, just like relationships and everything else, is a spiritual growth dojo. And a lot of what you had to walk through, the fires that you've gone through, has supported you now to be in this space where you are teaching from really deep lived experience, embodied experience. And I'm curious, through all of this, right? Through reading The Power of Now, doing the affirmations, the visualizations, stepping into a space which you're teaching wealth and helping people through this sovereignty space, to now where you are right now having this conversation, right? And this being a really pivotal point because you're emerging from the darkness, right? Of kind of leaving the internet, not having this personality. Probably, I can imagine, through what you've gone through for the past year and a half, 2 years, a lot of soul searching into what it is you are now sharing about and what this conversation is about. Because a lot of people want the shortcut, they want the fix, they want the hack to a better life, to more money, to the love and relationship and all of that. We all know that's bullshit, that we have to travel our own inner path to be able
Yep.
to arrive at these things in the external world, as within, so without. And so, to kick off this part of the conversation, which I'm sure there's going to be a lot more that comes from it, talk to me a little bit about your path to perhaps seeking outward in these things that you believe may fulfill you, right? And you've made a lot of money, you've had a lot of outward success, and the inward path that one must travel in order to experience that depth of prosperity, wealth, and abundance within, to cultivate that level of consciousness, and what this path requires.
Yeah, it's a good question. Let me sit with that for a second. So what I just kind of walked through was really like my age 20 to 30 uh arc, and I'm 34 now. The main dark night for me during that period was waking up in jail and rebuilding, changing, going from a boy to a man, really, like in that arc, right? But as you mentioned, I'm coming off of 16 months being away from the internet. And so I think this would be a good segue into answering your question here about seeking externally, and then kind of always being brought back to the realization that this journey is entirely a internal journey. And so I talked a lot about the outwards in that, right? Like what it looked like on the outside, but I didn't as much get into on the inside, which I can do a little bit more of now. So it begs the question, if the LUC was, so successful, and it was, I had, built up the brand that, I believe that's how you found out about me, and collaborating with Aaron. We had the Great Awakening podcast. I had the Conscious Wealth podcast, all these different things going. Why did I walk away from the internet? And so, I think this can serve as a great example that the work is never done. There is no arrival. And I had, from age, starting to be curious at 20, working on myself, but really 23 was when I got serious about it, to 30. So 7 to 10 years, depending how you want to quantify that. I had done an immense amount of inner work on myself. I didn't talk as much about that because, I don't know, it's hard to fit a decade into the beginning of a podcast. And I'm always conscious of like, it's going to take too long. But, I've explored everything, from, stuff in more of the realm of your unconscious mind, explored stuff in the more of the therapy modalities, the somatic modalities, hypnosis type stuff, all sorts of things. And all of it was geared around letting go of stuff that was no longer serving me, things that weren't me, masks I was wearing, things I was carrying from the past, limiting beliefs, trauma, all the things, right? And so by the time I was 30, I was like, I am very equipped to serve. I had been coaching people who were, twice my age, 3 times my age since my young 20s. But that doesn't mean that I was, in a place of lived embodiment at that time. That was something I had to grow into. By the time I was 30, part of the reason I felt, ready and qualified to start working with hundreds and hundreds of students at once is because, well, I had worked with all sorts of different types of people, and I had went through so many different arcs of my own journey where I had done, many, many years of intentional inner work on myself, many years of studying my own patterns and what I would call mapping out your kind of inner architecture, parts, selves, tendencies, ways in which you compartmentalize, you understand your trauma background, your typical triggers, the way your blind spots, just all these different things, right? And and then I met my wife Jax when I think I was 20. I was 26. And that was another huge catalyst for me to level up, because she's 7 years older than me, and she already had a son, and I was like, I need to get my shit together in terms of, this is a grown ass woman. And so that was another season, right, where that's a whole podcast of its own, conscious relationships, and how much that calls you forward, right? Oh man, becoming a stepdad, becoming a provider, all the things where I had to really, level up there. So those are different seasons of external reality reflecting back to me areas in which I am still not free, areas in which I am still distorted or compartmentalized or referencing the past or looping or whatever it may be. And so fast forward to what I started this with, where I was proposing the question of like, if things were going so great, like 31, 32 years old, why do I walk away from the internet? Well, around age 31, I wake up one day with basically crippling back pain, like nerve pain in my lower back. And I was asleep. There was no like bending over injury. There was no lifting in the gym. I was literally asleep, and I was woke up to like stabbing pain, and I couldn't get out of bed for multiple days. And that's the whole thing. I'll just speed through that and say that was the beginning of the latest hero's journey, the latest full cycle, right? So I'm still in that, to be clear. I'm coming out of the tail end of that, but by no means have I completed the full circle there. And so that's kind of like my 30s arc, where it's like from 20 to 30, I was acting out and building a life that I had determined or I should say that my karma and momentum had determined for me. I was dead set on becoming successful. I was dead set on what I thought freedom was. I was dead set on who I thought I needed to be and what I thought my life needed to look like. And there was no telling me otherwise. There was no stopping that. And so I did that. And guess what happened when I got there? It wasn't what I thought. It didn't bring me happiness. It didn't bring me the peace that I thought, financial freedom would bring me. It actually brought me the opposite. And so when I finally reached financial freedom around age 30, that entered me into the biggest dark night yet, where it was like, now you have no excuses. It's like you've told yourself your whole life that if I just had blank, then I would feel better. And you get there and you have blank, but you don't feel better at all. And on top of that, you don't get to complain. There's no complaining. Who feels bad for the, multimillionaire who's crying about their feelings? As a society, we don't really empathize with that, right? When an actor or a hedge fund owner or whatever kills themselves because they couldn't handle it anymore, society doesn't really do well with that story. There's not much empathy or understanding there, right? It's something you have to experience, and not many people experience it. So anyway, there's that aspect of the financial piece where I'm like, okay, I just spent a decade just working to get to this level, and it's not exactly, by no means is it bad. And we'll talk about that. You don't want to conflate what I'm saying with money doesn't matter or it's not important. It's just that money solves money problems. It doesn't solve all your problems. So there's that. And then there's I'm 31 and I just wake up debilitating back pain. And I proceed to go on this multi-year quest, working with practitioner after practitioner, modality after modality. Nothing is helping. And it's brutal. Like every morning between 3 and 4:30 a.m., I'm woken up by like burning and I can't really go back to bed. So you end up getting stuck in like fight or flight and cortisol. And now you have multiple things, just like a feedback loop working against you, right? So this is coming at a time when I had done so much inner work and I had such a foundation of practices and spiritual understanding that it was like, for a while, it was confusing to me. It was like, I thought that I was further than to be experiencing that, right? Oh, by the way, also huge background in health and fitness. I understand mobility. I understand the body. I understand what the body needs to remain structurally in integrity. Yeah, none of that was working. None of that mattered. So I quickly realized this is an existential type situation. This is a hero's journey I'm being invited onto, round 2. So long story short, that leads me to, after trying probably 10 different practitioners over probably a year and a half, to no avail, I finally, out of desperation, agree. My friend's like, look, I really think you should try a session with her mentor at the time. And I had no idea what it was, but I was just like, all right, whatever. There's no downside here. Can't get worse. And long story short, I got my face blown off, and after that first session, I was in bed sick for a week. All we did was work on, I guess you could call it energetics. I didn't know what the hell she was doing, but I proceeded to be ill for a week. I had like uncontrollable convulsions at one point during that experience, where I was like hallucinating. And then I get a call from my landlord that I have less than 30 days to move out. So after that first session, I was like, this is the real deal. So I just committed to that work. And long story short, that work led me to a point where we had unwound so much karma and so much of the inner dysfunction that I had compartmentalized that I wasn't even aware of, because I thought I was spiritual. I thought I was further than that. I had put in 7 fucking years. I had meditated countless hours. Like, how is this happening to me? Right. And of course, the spiritual ego is very sneaky, right? It's maybe we get better at compartmentalizing and we think we've arrived or something. And so that was a beautiful experience. It was a very humbling experience. And what the work eventually led me to with my mentor is a realization that the next step in my journey was that I needed to unwind the business that I had created because of where in me I had created it from. It represented something that wasn't me. It wasn't me. It came from places in me. If we want to talk about like parts and selves work, came from parts of me that were trying to get needs met through acting out strategies that were never going to actually meet those needs. And that's what creates looping. That's what creates what in the work that I do, what we call unresolution. And so that was probably one of the tougher decisions of my life. At the time, I had built that business to a point where it was making many six figures a month, very high margin business. I loved the work that I did, and I was just starting to reach kind of terminal velocity in terms of our reach, our scale, people, our audience, and all the things, and just coming on the internet. And I just announced my goodbye internet video that I was closing things down, and I'm proud of myself for doing that. Old me would have never ever done that. It makes for a cool story now, but try to imagine these parts of you that are more achievement and success oriented, worked over a decade to put yourself in a position to have that kind of grand slam, and you're finally experiencing the early stages of your grand slam, and you just let it all go. You burn it down. But despite what parts of me who sometimes hijack my system, and I fall asleep to thinking I'm that, despite what those parts of me think or may want me to believe, the point of all of this, the point of the journey, even business, even wealth, all the things, is spiritual. It is all, to me, at least this is how I understand it, this is how I relate to it, and this is how I teach it, that wealth is a spiritual journey. And that even though at times I may fall asleep to it and then have to wake back up and remember that the point of why I'm doing what I'm doing is not money. It isn't success. It isn't followers. It isn't accolades. It isn't achievement. Those things are great. They can be great. They can also be detrimental, but those things don't matter. The point of all of this is to learn about why you're here, who you are, what you are, and where you're going. And so that was a cool moment that I got to put that into practice, because a lot of us say that we trust God or believe in God. But when you're asked to give up the thing that these, parts of you, or what your personality most thinks that it most desires, it's like, all right, just give that up then. I saw that as the ultimate opportunity for a pretty epic hero's journey, right? So the good thing is I was at a point where it was like, can't be worse than what I've been experiencing. I would have done anything to get out of the back pain that I was in. I mean, it's pretty dark. That was my first experience with chronic pain. It can get pretty dark. And so that, like, if we zoom out and look at that situation, what a beautiful catalyst. If I didn't have back pain that came and knocked on my door in the middle of the night that wouldn't leave, if I could have just layered some vices on top of it, or some Band-Aids and doled it out, if any of that worked, then I wouldn't have went through the experience that I just went through, which has been the deepest initiation of my life by an order of magnitude. It has me coming out the other side just not even remotely looking at life or relating to life the same way. to such a degree that I'm still integrating how to show up back in society. I wasn't sure I was ever going to come back to the public, honestly. I said that in my Goodbye Internet video. And I wasn't just saying that. I could easily just invest for a living and not be in the public. But I was asked to return after it was probably like 14, probably about after 14 months away from the internet. And that had been a little over 2 years of working with my mentor. It started to become very clear that I was supposed to come back to the internet. It just wasn't something that I could consider at that time. And I now understand how all of that needed to play out and why. And so to kind of wrap this up, all throughout my journey, as I mentioned, I go through these ebbs and flows where I'm teaching, I'm sharing, I'm helping, but then inevitably you start to recognize where you're off course, where you're not in alignment, et cetera, and you kind of have to go back in, right? Go back underwater, if you will. And I had normally done that in a way where I didn't have to completely dismantle my life. Ideally, you do that as you live, right? Whether that's in a daily, weekly, monthly, year, like whatever cadence. But this last one was so intense that we were working a lot of what we were working on, and the reason that I had the back pain in the first place was karma and karmic momentum. And I didn't really have an understanding of what that meant, what that entailed. I had thought of karma just in, the basic Eastern sense, but I hadn't been taught it in depth in the way that my mentor kind of showed me the depth of it. And so a lot of what we were working on is things that I've carried for many, many lifetimes. And this is very deep. It's deeper than even thinking of things through an ancestral lens. So in that unwinding, coming out the other side, deciding to start a Substack and start to share about these things, I was already teaching wealth from a conscious perspective. I was already sharing, the things that I had learned along what's been a hell of a journey so far, an unorthodox journey for sure. But this has given me a whole new understanding. The death and rebirth that I've gone through, the amount of deconstruction that I've experienced, sitting with myself. I've spent a countless number of weeks just in bed. It was like it was a mixture of a midlife crisis, retirement, and a pretty formal sabbatical. Just an immense amount of time to zoom out and assess my life up until now. How did I get here? The good, the bad, the areas that I'm off track. How did I end up here? And gaining clarity on that. And so that's what makes me most excited to in the work that I'm now doing, because it may look similar how I'm sharing, because it's at the intersection of finance and consciousness or spirituality, but where I'm sharing from is completely different. How I built the LUC, the conscious wealth, is like if you ever saw content of mine on the internet before, pre me leaving the internet, that was coming from a decade of lived experience. But wrapped up in that was all sorts of covert dysfunction, lower codes, karmic momentum that I had no way of even recognizing. The depth of my inner work was this lifetime. I had spent an immense amount of time clearing out my upbringing and trauma from this life. I didn't really have context or meaning about past lifetimes, momentum, and some of these concepts that were a little bit more out there. Well, I no longer consider those things out there. They're very real. And maybe I wouldn't have believed in that if they didn't arrive on my doorstep and turn my life upside down. But I'm very grateful that they did. And so that represents this latest arc, which, like I said, I'm still in. By no means have I had the full return of the hero's journey, but I would say I'm in the later stages there, and I'm constantly being reminded of the importance of consistent lived practice and not falling asleep to ever thinking that one has arrived by any means. So hopefully that gives you and the listeners a little bit more context. And if we want to go into any of the actual like specifics of more specific examples or anything like that about any of this kind of work, I'm always happy to talk about it.
Yeah, brother. Well, I really deeply appreciate your vulnerability, and also for you to open up about your journey in this way. I find it to be extremely illuminating and revealing in so many ways, the death and rebirth that we go through and these dark nights that we find ourselves in, and how powerful, how humbling these experiences are, and to be taken to your knees quite literally in this way with the excruciating pain, and also the perfection of it all, the perfection of the intelligence that governs life, and call it whatever higher power you want, call it God, great spirit, source, creator, all of this weaving through our experience to bring us into a deeper gnosis of who we are. Because as you stated before, at the core, this is the inner realization of the depth of who we are as souls that have come here on this planet at this time in this earthly realm. And it is not void of pain. It is not void of these deep shamanic initiations that we find ourselves in. And so you going through this, a big part of what you shared, and I guess what resonated with me along what I've gone through in my own path, is the reorientation to our innermost self, and what I perceive to be this rebalancing of the masculine and the feminine. And when I say that, I'm speaking to the depth of the principles, the energy that lives within us. And this world we have been so deeply conditioned to go outside, externalize, accomplish, produce, perform, all of that. And most recently, I actually just recorded a whole video on this, on the rise of the fierce feminine. And when I was sharing that, it really much has to do with this very powerful force that we have deeply oppressed for so long on this planet, most importantly and internally within ourselves, the oppression of the feminine, which asks us to be, which asks us to surrender, to let go, to give up our will for something that's much greater. And oftentimes, if we are not listening, the injuries come, the body starts speaking in this way, the losses, all of the things that we go through, because what precedes doing, it's being. It's that being in the void, being in the uncomfortable, being in the unknown, in the uncertainty. And we as a human species has not really lived in alignment in that way, because of the conditioning, the programming, all of the things in which we are just constantly in this busyness, in this doing, in this proving, striving, chasing, etc., whatever you want to call it. And so I'm very interested, just from your lens and from what you experience, in this deep level of surrender, which a lot of people don't touch, right? And as you mentioned before, experiencing the external wealth, the money and all of these things, but then having to go through this complete breakdown internally. And I know there's a lot of people listening to this right now. We can all relate to finding ourselves completely exhausted, completely overwhelmed, striving for these things when we feel completely at lack. We feel that scarcity within ourselves. We feel all of these things that, again, the unworthiness, the insecurity. And these are the deeper layers that we must work through in order to experience anything we desire externally, where we're so much conditioned to chase effects rather than actually the cause, which is our consciousness. So speaking to, and of course, if you want to go deeper into any level of your story, but speaking to wealth mechanics, first of all, what does true wealth mean to you at this moment in time, having gone through that? And then speaking to the wealth mechanics of working from the level of our consciousness first and foremost, before anything externally can begin to happen. And yeah, anything else you want to share in that?
Cool questions. So I'll go in order. How would I define wealth at this point? I would say wealth is the realization of a lasting state of coherence. How do we define coherence? Well, let's invert it. Coherence is the absence of dysfunction or distortion. So if we think about a system with a bunch of nodes or interconnections bouncing around, visualize that looking and feeling very harmonious, and then visualize that looking and feeling very disgruntled and kind of messy and chaotic, right? That's a lot of what's going on inside of us metaphysically, depending on the consciousness that we're sourcing from, depending on the pathways within us that we either have built or haven't built to house consciousness. And some of these things like lower codes and stuff like that all affect that. So the way I usually teach wealth to my students is the foundation is absolutely metaphysical, or what you may call energetic. There's no way around that. And I've worked with over 1,000 students at this point, and I can tell you that for a fact. I've seen a certain type of archetype who, comes into working with me and maybe isn't fully sold on that stuff, and they're like, oh, I just want to get straight to the good stuff, right? I'm looking to make some money here. And inevitably what you see over and over and over is that person, maybe they make some money. It depends, right? That's specific. I can't speak to that, but inevitably something will happen that sends them back to the initial suggested path that we laid out, where they start with the inner world before trying to get to the tactics, the strategies, the external approaches there. So that's something that's very important. But I will layer on some nuance here, because I do think that a lot of people in the spiritual space, and this is more, I guess, in my little niche, which I don't think there's really that many people that teach wealth in the spiritual space, but from what I have seen, mainly it's a talk of energetics and mindset and all of that wealth consciousness. That is absolutely important, and it is absolutely a thing. Having said that, and maybe this segues into your second question, which I'll probably need you to remind me the exact verbiage of it, but there is absolutely an importance and value to the actual financial literacy strategy skill set piece. And I would say that's kind of maybe something that's I would consider that common sense, but might be unique about how I go about wealth creation and teaching wealth versus others. Reason being, like, you can have an amazing money mindset. You can have done a lot of congruence work to be able to be congruent with receiving, holding, stewarding wealth. You can have evolved a far way away from lack and scarcity, but at a foundational level, you also need skill sets. And without specific skill sets, it's not just a stork isn't gonna just drop money on your doorstep. So I think those two are kind of yin yang. And coming back to your reference of the masculine and the feminine, that's how I view those things, right? Like, all receiving starts internally. There is a needing to get out of your head and into your heart to open yourself up to that. But then it needs to be married with the masculine when it gets acted out in the world. And so what I see is that some people um people are going to opt to one side or the other in imbalance, right? And so coherence is, as I said, the absence of dysfunction, or you could say it a different way, the absence of imbalance. So if some people, like, for example, my proclivities, right, throughout the arc I described, will be too much to the masculine side. So the greatest medicine for me are things that bring me into my heart, things that bring me more into the now, things that bring me out of the planning, the strategizing, the achieving. But a lot of people that I work with, especially in the spiritual space, are actually too far over on the feminine side. I don't want to create generalities. I'm just speaking on the sample size of people that I've worked with. And generally, I also think I probably attract those kind of people because they are attracted to the structure. But that kind of person is going to struggle in a different way. They're going to be very open, able to receive, maybe even quite present and spiritually alive, but their financial reality doesn't exactly reflect that. And so that's where it's like, I feel that a lot of the new age conversations around money and wealth are incomplete. We've been handed bits and pieces. Like, I'm 20 and I find out about the law of attraction. I was just like, I remember I just cried and I was just like, my life is forever changed. And no, it didn't actually work out like that. I had to also, build real skill sets and do some tangible things. But it is an important understanding that, like, you can't just do what the corporate world or society tells you, where it's like work hard, grind, achieve, etc. Both those things matter. So let me pause that and then ask if you could reiterate your second question to me.
Yeah, so the first was what is true wealth, which you really described here as that inner coherence. And actually, I would love to go, before we go into the next part, I would love to go a little bit deeper into that. So the coherence is the marriage between, we'll call it, for lack of better terms, the masculine and the feminine, right? The strategy, the skill set, the outward doing, the service, which actually that's a key part that I would love to touch on, is that service and contribution point, whereas being of service to the whole, and what that actually means, met with the feminine of the receiving, of being able to be in the void and to allow ourselves to be open enough to tap into the heart and in the intuition. So I would love for you to speak the pathway into coherence, into the balancing of the masculine and feminine, because people are going to be listening to this from either side. They're either going to be very much strongly in that feminine, as you mentioned, or maybe more strongly in the masculine. So how do we come back to that coherence within ourselves? And then I would love to open the conversation to using our gifts, using ourselves and what we've been given to be of service and to contribute to the whole and to the evolution of humanity, because I believe we're all designed to serve in some capacity, in some way.
Okay. Let me sit with that. So one of the challenges when talking about this stuff is that words are at best wrappers for consciousness. And so I think maybe I should start with some definitions to kind of like attempt to lay out a landscape here.
Yeah, I love that. I
Because
know
one of the
words are limiting. It's
yeah, like,
very much
and
energetic in this
also
way.
one of the
So
common things in the spiritual space is like we all we use similar words, but they may mean different things to different people. You know what I mean? Like even like the word alignment, it's like, can you define what that means for you? So I am 2.5 years into my journey of the work with my mentor, and it is work that is one of one. I've never come across anything remotely like it. My mentor Tria is very specific. She's very strict on words, definitions, etc. So we use muscle testing, and we work with combination of your system, which you could think of as your higher self, as well as benevolence, so higher beings, and you kind of use that to calibrate things and test true false. Is this correct? Should I say it differently, et cetera, et cetera. That's taken me a long time to learn, and it's a consistent practice. So I just want to lay that out there. That's one differentiator from every other modality I've ever learned. It's more of I was going off of my feelings, or I was going off of what intuitively felt right to me. But what I've learned is that can get us into some muddy waters, because pretty much every human on this planet, regardless of how spiritual you are, regardless of if we're talking about me, you, Aaron Abkey, Aubrey Marcus, it doesn't matter that you have a good heart and want to help people. There is an immense amount of dysfunction on this planet. Part of it is the planet and us being in resonance with that. Like we're in this domain, and inherent in this domain is dysfunction. And part of it is our own long arc, which is what the term we use for like your many lifetime karma that you kind of bring into this life. So when I talk about coherence, I wouldn't exactly say that what I'm describing could be defined as the union of the masculine and the feminine, though I do see what you're painting and there are similarities. I'll attempt to give some basic definitions that everyone could understand. So a lot of the work that I've learned looks at things from a systems perspective, systems thinking, if you're familiar with that. And so you're looking at like you're never looking. It's like Western medicine wants to like look at your ankle or like your knee, whereas holistic medicine looks at you as a being. And so your knee might hurt, but they might work on your emotion of grief, right? It's like, wait, what? So apply that to what we're talking about. So it's like, so there's an entire system that is you. And so you have a biological system, but you also have subtle systems like your nervous system and kind of like what people call your aura, or like your ethereal system. Like you have these, some systems you can see, some systems you can't. That's why it's very helpful to learn muscle testing, or there's other ways, but to be attuned to these subtle frequencies, right? Which is a gift. And when we're looking at things from a systems perspective, there are all sorts of different components within that system, right? So you've got, I'll just make it super simple: your mind, your heart, and your lower center. Okay. Like you could also think of it as the chakras, but largely we work with 3 centers. The relationship of communication and referencing between those 3 centers, or even if you want to double click into any of the centers, like within your heart, everything going on in there. There's structures, there's codes, there's consciousness that you're sourcing, there's consciousness that you're creating, there's all sorts of different things going on. It's the interrelation between all of those that either could be measured as coherent or dysfunctional. And so when I say like actual wealth is defined as coherence, what I'm speaking to is that aiming at or achieving material wealth is awesome, and by no means is something that needs to be demonized, which is a separate conversation we should probably have, because I think it would benefit this kind of audience. And money alone doesn't change internal dysfunction. So it's about, is there a way in which we can relate to life and also kind of rearrange our internal architecture so that we're able to relate to life from a place of coherence rather than dysfunction. And if we add money to that, that is an extremely beautiful recipe for this planet. Because what will happen when you give a system that operates from coherence, material abundance, is that it will use that material abundance to add value to all of life. That's what coherence does. Coherence leaves every node in the system better than it found it. It doesn't take. Despite having exchange, it never takes, if that makes sense. It gives, it provides, it's life creating. So the more I describe this way and almost like, or the more I describe coherence in an almost poetic way, you may be noticing that there's a lot of similarities. You could almost swap out the word coherence for love, because as we all know, love is the highest vibration, right? So these things are similar. It's just different ways of defining them. And one last piece I'll add is that you asked a little bit more about the process. Now, that would be many, many hours for me to explain, because, well, for me to go through my own process of this, it's been 2.5 years of segmented work. But to give a high level overview, the ways in which we relate to consciousness is the bulk of the work. Now, we have names for that, like there are lower codes, there's detrimental structures, there's these different names, but I don't want to confuse the audience that's a little bit more advanced. I'll just say that, how did I go from being woken up every night at between 3 and 4:30 a.m. and just basically living on ice packs and heat and, chronic pain? How did I go from that to having more vitality than I've ever had? I had to untangle my consciousness from all the places I had put it that were downwards. I used to think of consciousness as, like the fuzzy energy waves all around us. I didn't understand that the magnitude and the degree to which our intention and attention create reality. I thought I did. I've spoken on and been a huge fan of intention and attention for many, many years. But as you know, in the spiritual path, you come back in a circular fashion to learning things at deeper and deeper and deeper levels. And what I can say is that through congruence, which you can think of as cymatic resonance, I'm not saying congruence does not mean beliefs, different things. Being congruent with something doesn't mean you have a belief of it. It's underneath that. But anyway, through congruence, we enmesh or attach our consciousness to different things. And I had my consciousness, I was sourcing consciousness from over 150 different detrimental structures. I had a few hundred lower codes running in me. And this is after a decade of inner work. So going through this experience, it's given me a completely different perspective on why this planet is so dysfunctional. I had been genuinely trying my best for close to a decade, doing work that no one in my lineage, none of my friends I grew up with, virtually no one I've ever met except for the internet friends I made are doing. And yet, when I met my mentor, I was so full of dysfunction that it was as if I had spent my life as an alcoholic. What do you do with that? Understanding that has given me a completely different perspective through which I want to teach, serve, and lead. And that is an understanding of, rather than thinking that I'm further than others because I've put in all this work, an understanding of my own fucked upness at a level of depth that is actually extremely liberating, because it means that others may not want to admit it, but I can see, feel, and understand where they're at. And because I've taken myself through this process, and once again, I want to be very clear, there is no end destination. I'm not trying to claim I'm some finished product. But I will say there's been an immense clearing out. And it allows me to look at life and see other people in ways that weren't possible before, regardless of all the inner work and the ceremonies and the meditation and the self-inquiry and all the things. So I think that's important to name. And there was one more piece that I wanted to touch on. All right, I want to give a tangible piece. And I hope this isn't too fragmented. This is something I'm going to have to learn how to communicate when I'm dealing with audiences who most aren't going to have any background in this work. And there's extremely complex and kind of specific definitions. And so I'll have to hash that out over time. But I want to leave something tangible before I hand it off to you, which is at a very simple level, not needing to understand any of this kind of metaphysical architecture of reality that I'm attempting to kind of map out here. For those who are asking the question, well, how does one experience greater levels of coherence? I want to explain this concept of owning your side of the equation, which has been very profound for me. So owning your side of the equation basically means that, I'll say it basically looks like sitting down and going through almost like a life review. Like if you've heard, I hear a lot when people talk about ibogaine, they get shown like a full visual like life review, like almost like a wall of all the things, and they have this unique chance. I've also heard it with ayahuasca, to kind of see all the fucked up shit they did basically, and they kind of have this completely like wiped slate, right? Now integrating that, it's a whole other conversation, but they do at least experience that. In many ways, that's what this work has been like for me. I've fully sober though, which is a trip, because I used to rely on entheogens to try to get to this level of depth. And this has been a fully sober, slow ceremony for 2.5 years, but it is very much so equally disorienting and difficult. And, but it allows for a lot more integration. So the unwind or owning your side of the equation basically looks like going through the themes in your life. What are the repeating patterns, the things that life keeps reflecting back to you, right? That's an easy place to start. The bad things that keep happening to you, or the dynamics, the struggles, the similar, right? Like just applying pattern recognition to your own life. And then it looks like getting very, very clear and honest at an uncomfortable level with how you're inviting that into your lived experience. That might sound like a basic exercise, but it opens the door to understanding congruence, because you can do all the belief work and all the identity work in the world. I did it for a long time. I've worked with different hypnotists. I was doing visualization and meditation and affirmations for probably like 8 years. And it works for certain things. Like it definitely works. But that sits still above the level that I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is like a foundational level of how you relate to life. If you remove any sort of external thing you may or may not be trying to experience or achieve, this is about how you relate to life. It's going to show up in how you relate as a parent, how you relate as a son or daughter, how you relate in your career, how you relate to money, how you relate to your body, how you relate to God. It's going to show up in all these different ways. And so really what the process looks like, just to at least at an elementary level that could get people started who are maybe curious, is I think the analogy of a thread, like pulling on a ball of yarn, is good. You just start with noticing the patterns here, and that's reflecting back to you how you've been using your consciousness and what you've been congruent with. Now, some of that, a lot of that, if you're like most people, is going to be things that are hard for you to accept or entertain that you created. And so that's the perfect kind of entry point of pulling on the yarn. And it's important to remain open and curious. If there's defensiveness, etc., that's where I guess, some of the nervous system work comes in. You have to have a genuine desire. Like at the end of the day, I can attempt to start to go into, like how people can experience these things, but more than anything, it's like, why did I burn my business down that I spent over a decade working up to? It's like, because truth matters to me more than anything else. I wanted to realize truth. And if you're not yet there, I think that's a very individual journey. I don't think that most people are, I don't know that this lifetime needs to be the lifetime for a lot of people. The lifetime that they handle, that they rectify all of their karma, that they commit to and experience self-realization. I don't know that that's high up on a lot of people's list either, but if it is, I can say that it's a long fucking journey. And I think it's important that people start where they're at. And it's always going to start with recognition of your own patterns and the role that you've played in your life experience thus far. If you keep pulling on that yarn, it will lead you places. And I suppose in many ways, I started pulling on that yarn long before I ever met my mentor. And everything I did up until that point were stepping stones, until I finally found a complete system that I feel encapsulates everything that I had been looking for and has really accelerated my spiritual journey and given me not just like a full methodology, but precise tools like muscle testing. Whereas before, I used to have to rely on life to reflect things back to me. I used to have to journal a lot or meditate and hope that my unconscious mind or higher self would kind of pop something into my awareness, and I'd, oh shit, let me, look at that. But that's like a much slower process than what I'm now able to do, where I could literally just test, is this on a scale of 1 to 100, where does my coherence currently rate or whatever, right? And then, okay, if it's not looking good, in what area could I, is there any area within my system that would most benefit from me putting my attention on it to improve my coherence? Or is there any lower code that needs to be looked at right now, or whatever it may be? It's kind of like a whole new world, and it's something that I've actually introduced Aaron Apke to, and I've seen he's started to talk on this a little bit. And I feel that it's a unique time in the spiritual space for innovation. So whenever I do fully come back to the internet, I'm excited to be, start teaching on some of this stuff at a foundational level. It's not to say there's like one right way or anything like that. It's more so just, as you know, like most of us have been on this quest and we've tried so many different things, and there will be a few key things that really like resonate with you and move the needle. And for me, this has been by far the biggest. And so I'm passionate about it in that sense. And it's really advanced and difficult and hard and not sexy. And so most people aren't going to be interested in that. And so for those people, I would say it's maybe more important to focus on more of the foundations, like nervous system stuff and somatic stuff and limiting beliefs and all that, because it's like, I didn't wake up and just start muscle testing and talking to benevolence. Like it's a 10+ year journey of like very difficult unwinding. And then you start to become more and more and more attuned.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the level in which you shared a few things here, which I'm going to recap, which I feel are important for the listener. Number one, it's responsibility, right? Self-responsibility, self-ownership, self-honesty, becoming honest with ourselves, becoming honest with where we're at, what life is showing us, looking at our relationships, our relationship to ourselves, to our intimate partners, to our children, to money, to whatever it is, because life is nothing but this experience of relationships. As long as we are in the belief of separation and the other, that they are mirroring something back to us, whatever relationship that is. And then coming into this deeper level of inquiry and using sort of as you've explained, muscle testing as this dashboard or interface with our own consciousness, to be able to tap into ourselves in a way that's maybe a little bit more direct and meaningful than sort of waiting around to see where we're being shown or what's happening around us through our higher self, or whatever terminology you want to use. So these really, again, the foundations of what you shared here, I think, are really important. And I'm curious now, because, you mentioned coherence and how that could be equated to love, and love being the highest vibration. And, I would agree upon, with you on that. And would you feel that at this point right now, of course, you're still in continuing to unravel and go through this spiral of this journey, which is really what it's about. It's layer upon layer upon layer, getting to that diamond, that gem that's in the middle, which is the pure emanation of love. And so would you say that at this point right now, you have a deeper level of compassion, a deeper level of grace, a deeper level of love? And now how does that impact your service moving forward, now operating from that place?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to answer this differently than probably most people who are asked that would be. And I'll be uh, extremely honest. Out of the 153 detrimental structures that I've had to unwind, that I had enmeshed my consciousness in when I started really doing the work that I've been talking about, by far the hardest one out of any of them is, I'll quote it, "I cannot trust my heart to lead." And it's an extremely rampant detrimental structure on this planet. To be clear, a structure isn't the same as a belief. It can exist inside of you. It can exist outside of you. I would prefer for people to think of a structure as an actual physical structure, like metaphysical structure that houses consciousness, and think of it as existing outside of us as like collective thought forms. Like many associate to religion. You could think of things that culturally, traditions, things that aren't questioned, right? So you could think of those as detrimental structures if they are detrimental, right? And so this is very common on this planet. It's not something that's specific to me, but also due to my own experience and like karma and all that, I have had the hardest time with that more than almost anything else. It's actually the last detrimental structure. Yeah, I'm still not fully complete with that process, according to my testing. And so what I want to convey is, I guess, maybe just a little bit of an inside look, because I used to view spirituality through more of a like transactional or measurable way, as if like, okay, I have this limiting belief, right? And then I'd be like, okay, I'm going to do all this work. And then it's like, okay, now I don't have this limiting belief. What's next? Very much so like trying to measure it and all that, right? And that comes with this conflation that if and when you finally reach a certain state, you're ready to house that state. And so maybe we can talk about this a little bit, because it's something that I can tell based on some of the stuff you shared on Substack that you're present to. It's something I've been talking with Aaron a lot about recently. And it's kind of like this idea that there are different levels of spiritual maturity. And level 1 is basically like your awakening, right? We all have our awakening story. And then level 2 is like kind of the area where a lot of us get trapped. And that's where you're basically like chasing peak experiences. And that's the person who's on their 50th round of ayahuasca. That's the person who's like, oh man, I'm fucked up another relationship. I'm headed back to Costa Rica. And it's like, how about you look inwards? Ayahuasca can't do the work for you, my friend. And so that's me and you have, I can guarantee we both have many friends like that, right? They're stuck in the wheel. And then what's the phase after that? The phase after that is integration. And I always thought of integration as, just actually doing the work in the day to day. I have a different, there's more pieces to it, right? Of course, like you need the nervous system component, and you need to actually be able to regulate and make meaning of your experiences so that they translate to behavior change and changes in the way that you relate to life and all that, of course. But I have like a different level to add, if we want to call it level 3.5 or 4, that I never had context of before until I went through what I'm coming out of. And it is that I didn't understand before that I was all about levels of consciousness. Like I'm a big David Hawkins fan. Like I've understood consciousness for a long time. Like vibration, what vibration are you at? High vibe and all that. But I didn't understand that we have metaphysical scaffolding inside of us that routes consciousness. We have, if you want to think of them as piping and plumbing in our kind of ethereal system. And that is actually the bubble that interfaces with out there, if you will. And when we bring consciousness down or in, or however you want to think of it, once again, language is but when we try to bring it in and interface with it, it has to go through that piping and plumbing before it comes through you and out. And that's where most of us struggle. I've had to have my entire inner piping, plumbing, if you want to think of it as like the freeways and the highways and all that, rebuilt. in my heart center, my mind center, my lower center, and just overall connections between them and scaffolding in general. It's almost daily work for 2 years now. And it's given me such a different experiential understanding. I know that just sounds like words of like, oh, I'm just visualizing all that. It's like, but when you live the experience and you see the shifts that you can't explain, it's a different thing. So I'll just leave it at that. But like through living it and seeing how just being a completely different person now, I understand at such a different level why so many of us, even in the spiritual space, and this is something I'm very passionate about talking about right now, is like, I would say most spiritual leaders in the spiritual space, myself included before leaving the internet, are teaching from a place of understanding, awakening, peak experiences, and some integration, but not so much having entered the final stage of spiritual maturity, which is, have you built the pathways and the plumbing, aka the structure, to house the consciousness in you that you're trying to call in? And I say this as someone who has always loved breath work and microdosing and fucking hape and tobacco, like anything that's going to give me a blast off. I'm like, hell yeah. And just all the things, hypnosis, meditation, like all about the state change. And I spent like over a decade like chasing that, to where when you come back down to reality, it's like, oh, you think something's wrong, something's off. And it's like, the last few years has been my initiation into growing the fuck up and realizing that that's not real life. Chasing that is indicative that there's something missing. There are voids in me, because reality at all times just is. If you want to think of it as just bliss, love, consciousness, whatever, it just is. I'm the one feeling the voids, the aloneness, the collapsing, the isolation, the looping. Like, I'm the one. And I can do all of these things all I want, but if my kind of default that I'm always going to come back to is feeling like that again, I'm on this hamster wheel. So what this work has really allowed me to do, and once again, different people are absolutely able to find these things in different ways. I'm not trying to like, I know this might sound a little culty. It's just that this is where I'm at and this has impacted me. But in my lived experience, what this has allowed me to understand is that as a community, I'm speaking to the spiritual community at large, whether you're a leader or not, we should be spending more time talking about and working on pushing the conversation forward on that final leg of spiritual maturity, of how do we build the scaffolding, the structures, the pathways to house the consciousness that we've all tasted. We all agree it's divine. We love it. It's the best thing ever. If we could, we would live in it. But why do we struggle to so badly? It's like, well, there's a lot of convoluted distortion and dysfunction going on when we bring purity down through our system and pathways, and it pops out as dysfunction. So that's another, to tie it in, and then I'll hand it off to you, but to tie it into this understanding of coherence. Well, coherence would be the absence of any of that. It means that when you bring down from higher realms, if you want to think of them as, if you bring down higher codes, or you get download, or you experience pure love and you try to bring it back, it has to travel through your pathways. So I did a ton of the clearing around lower codes, detrimental structures, but then it's a whole other leg of the journey I've had to do around my subtle systems, my nervous system, and my kind of like etheric body. Around my pathways were just fucked. And my mentor pretty much straight up told me, like, one of your gifts is that you can kind of like go places, like travel, and you bring back wisdom. And that's what, if you want to call it downloads or whatever, like I've always had very visceral experiences. But she's like, every time you do, it's hurting you. It's causing you detriment and karma. And that's literally what I do as a teacher. So that was really hard to hear. And the more we unpacked that, she's like testing into my system and stuff. And what we found is that because my pathways were just 5% off, when I would bring back purity, it would just get slightly tainted by my own dysfunction. And so I would be then teaching, sharing, or living from a place of 95% purity and 5% human shit. And that created a shitload of karma for me. And I look around the spiritual space and I see that, and this isn't a malicious thing. It's just, I see that that's how most of us are sharing. And that's where we're relating from. And so it's something newer that I'm learning. And it's a conversation that I think more of us should be having. And at the very least, a very helpful framework for understanding, like, everyone has their own relationship to and approach to spirituality. To some people, it's just about feeling God. Some people, it's prayer. Some people, it's meditation. Others, it's breath work or whatever. But beyond those experiences, whether we've consciously realized it or not, we're reaching for something that we're trying to figure out how to get beyond our kind of like limitation or coming back down. And what is down? Down is dysfunction. Down is the opposite of coherence. So, spoken from someone who's done an immense amount of substances and entheogens and ceremonies and different modalities and has chased this for most of my life, I finally feel that I'm entering the era of what I would deem to be spiritual maturity. And this ties into your question because I'm still not there. You asked about my heart and living from it and how that's informing. I'll say that it has, if you can't tell, made me extremely honest. It has allowed me to drop the shit about thinking that I need to be perceived in ways that just aren't 100% true. It's allowed me to not feel like I need to show up on the internet in ways where I'm like, oh, well, I need to show the best side of me because these people are looking to me for guidance. And I see a lot of that too in the spiritual space. And once again, I don't think this is conscious or malicious. It kind of seems like it makes sense on the surface, but I now realize that these things do more harm than good. So do I walk around like feeling like Maharaji or Ram Dass 24/7? No. I have, I'm still, like, I just came out of a 3-week period where my heart was just fucking blasted open and I was like, time didn't exist. And it was incredible to experience that fully sober. It's nothing catalyzed it in terms of a peak state. It was just, okay, this is like a taste of a new normal that's available. Right. And then I enter my next process and it goes away. And I'm going through mind processes and there's like some looping and some referencing the past. And that's where I've been at the last few weeks. And it will continue to change. And so I suppose, that's what the Eastern philosophies are pointing to when they talk about non-attachment. But I just want to be, extremely transparent with the audience of like, old me would have been wanting to try to arrive at a destination and like, oh, I've reached this state of heart open bliss and thinking that it needs to never end, or what does it mean if it doesn't stay or whatever. But that's not what the journey is like. I now understand that we're here to learn how to be higher beings and participate in more coherent systems, but the system that we're in is dysfunctional as fuck. So what better breeding ground than to learn through the contrast that exists on this planet? And with that is like an understanding that it's not going to feel like love and light while you're here trying to learn how to be a higher being, but you're in biology with a limbic system on a planet with war, rape, and child trafficking, and you have the divine love of God in you. And that can be realized and experienced not just in these occasional peak states. It can be brought down and housed, but that's the key word, housed. And that requires structure to be built, a complete remodeling of your inner architecture. So that's what, I won't say that's what I've done. I'll say that's the journey that I'm still on.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, this conversation, I feel it's taken so many different turns and so many beautiful avenues in which we've explored together in this space. And I appreciate your time for, showing up even amongst all of the things that you're still navigating and continue to navigate, because, even Ram Dass that you've referenced, or Maharaji, or any of these other masters that have walked this planet, they still have existed within the mundane of their own humanness, within the depth of their own humanness. And that's why I feel the central message here is that it's not about escaping anything or fixing anything, or it's really coming deeper into the merging of both the human and of the divine, and coming into a level of acceptance as well of where we are, while looking at these structures that you've named, while looking in the plumbing and all of the ways in which things are flowing, so that we can become, really at the end of the day, conduits, channels, cleaner, purified channels for the divine, for that love to flow through us and then out into the world in whatever way, by walking down the street and being the embodiment of that love, by serving inside of our work, inside of our communities, inside of our families, all of those things, where we can then again be those channels and conduits for that energy to move through us freely. So once again, brother, I know there's so much here, and I'm sure we could probably go for another 2 hours into so many different avenues and the ways in which you're still unpacking all of this. But at the end of the day, right now, I guess I'll leave with this. What do you feel most excited about now that you've gone through this other layer of this human journey, and you're experiencing perhaps more of what you would call your truest self coming through, and allowing this to emerge through you? What excites you most right now about your journey, about this planet, about where we're at this beautiful threshold, this precipice of where humanity is going in very much unknown ways? But yeah, what makes you feel alive? What do you feel most excited about right now?
What's most alive in me at this time is getting to actually serve and fulfill the mission that I tried to serve and fulfill when I created the LUC. For those who aren't aware of my work, the my kind of uh, tagline or mission statement, if you will, for my last brand, and as well as the LUC, is basically just helping spiritually oriented people build wealth. And that's coming from an understanding that the vast majority of the wealth on this planet is controlled by downward beings. And so if you want to talk about, the Great Awakening or the collective awakening or any of these kind of spiritual ideas that, I would love to believe in as well. The financial aspect is huge. You can't have a planet where all of the material resources and money are controlled by downward beings with downward agendas. They're using that money for downward agendas. You can't have that and have the species that lives on that planet ascending. There's a little bit of a conflict of interest there. And so that's something that I've been aware of and was wanting to help with and have really helped with. We've created over 27 different multimillionaires in the last 2 years alone, helped add, I want to say off top, something like 45 million in net worth to our students. And these are only spiritual families. So that's awesome, right? Because as you know, a lot of spiritually oriented people struggle with their beliefs around money. They feel that if they were to desire money, they would be ungodly, or that if they were to charge for their services or desire to participate in capitalism, that they would somehow not be spiritual anymore. And these are lower codes. I want to be very clear about that. That enslaves you in poverty. Meanwhile, those who want you to believe that are raking it in and using those funds for downward agendas. So anyway, this is something that is, really close to my heart, but the way that I went about it before was not right for me. I had to burn it down. I had to close down both podcasts. I had to close the LUC down. I'm still in that period of starting anew, and higher yield is the representation of who I actually am and how I actually want to show up without a lot of this stuff that I brought into the business. It's exactly like what I talked about. 95% was already pure. I've never been someone who's I'm not trying to take advantage of people. I'm not swindling people. I deeply care about serving people. That's been true since I started helping people when I was 20. But that doesn't mean I didn't have my own dysfunctions and stuff I wasn't aware of. And that unfortunately affected and tainted my impact a little bit. It created karma, not because I didn't get people results or because I didn't try to help people, but because of where in me I was trying to help them from. It wasn't coming from pure love. It was coming from my own fears. And having navigated that in such a deep way these last 2.5 years, I'm finally qualified to actually re-emerge into the public. And this is the only reason I have re-emerged, because I'm finally in a space where I'm able to serve and not bring my own shit and unintentionally put it into the consciousness of my business, my brand, my mission, etc. So it's been very beautiful, man, because like I said, when I left the internet, I thought I was done. There, in my mind, it was done. There was no maybe. It was like that. It is what it is. Timelines changed as my unwinding progressed, and I found myself back here. And so right now I'm on Substack, and that's my primary thing that I'm doing for now. But higher yield is really a brand, and come 2027, I'm going to be launching some new and exciting things and seeking to build from the ground up by choice, right? I didn't have to burn everything down and let it go, but it was important. And then it matters to me that I do things in right relation with life. It matters to me that I don't have subtle fear or lower codes infused in the way that I'm building businesses, or why I even want to build a business, or how I'm leading people, right? Like briefly you touched on, I had a whole segment, multi-year period of my arc where I was helping people with sovereignty, and I had to step away from that because you want to talk about fear. I mean, that's peak fear. fear of the system, fear of being controlled, fear of being arrested, fear of being taken from. It was not right for me. So I had to burn that down. I've had to let go so many things that do not serve me. And I finally have come full circle to understanding like what my lane is, what I'm here to do, and most importantly, how to do that in a way that doesn't create karma or detriment for me or those who I'm impacting. So I feel like I've been offered a fresh slate, like a new chance at life. And I'm so grateful to be coming back into the public. I've only put out one YouTube video so far. I'm not really ready for that yet, but I will be coming back on in terms of long form content. And Substack, like I said, is my main thing right now that I'm excited about, where I'm getting to share the deeper intricacies of the work that I talked about today, as well as the finance piece. Like I said, it's not all just airy fairy. Let's talk about our congruences and stuff. Like there are skill sets, there are strategies, there's foundational financial literacy that's needed. And I'm very passionate about that stuff. I want to help transform the financial system on this planet. And most importantly, I want to help transform how spiritual people relate to money on this planet. So that's what my 30s and 40s look like. And I'm excited to be able to do that from a heart centered place.
Well, I really deeply appreciate your ways in which you're showing up from this period of this unraveling of this experience, this journey that you've gone through. And, I can feel the depth in which you've traveled through this conversation today, the depth in which you've shared this experience. And I'm sure there's so much more to it. And, really, I really appreciate you showing up here on this platform with me for the first time of, just coming out of this period of your life and now showing up on Substack and the things that you're doing and doing it very intentionally, very slowly, and from a place that's really serving from that heart and from that place of coherence. So brother, like, thank you again for all of your wisdom, for all that you shared today with me, with us, with everybody that's going to be listening to this. And again, for those of you that want to tune in deeper with Jeremy and you want to tap into his work, definitely go on Substack. And I'm sure there will be so much more that you'll be sharing along the way that people will really receive a lot from. And yeah, man, anything else before we tap out here? Anything else that you want to share with the audience?
I feel complete. Just want to say thank you, and thank you to everyone tuning in. I appreciate your attention and intention, and sending you all love on your journeys.
Beautiful, man. Well, thank you again and sending you all the love.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate you having me.